The diplomatic vessel Karen, unfolding, had 17 designated observation decks, but the one they gave to humans was Deck 9, the one with cracked pressure seal and the faint smell of burnt coolant that nobody had bothered to fix for 11 years. Ambassador Delegate Euryketh of the Solvane Collective noticed none of this. She was too busy watching the human, not the loud one, not the tall one with the medals pinned to his chest like he was afraid someone might forget what he'd survived, not the woman who kept asking questions in that sharp, forward-leaning way that made Solvane aides unconsciously flatten their gill crests. Euryketh was watching the one in the back row. She sat slightly apart from the other 7 humans, not dramatically, just enough that you'd only notice if you were already looking. She had pale brown skin and dark hair cut close on one side and longer on the other, asymmetrical in a way that the Solvane found either deeply artistic or deeply careless. And they couldn't yet determine which. She wore no medals. Her uniform had a single gray stripe on the left sleeve. Junior rank. Nobody. Her name tag read, Elara Voss, Systems Interpreter. Nobody knew exactly what that meant. The human delegation had been vague about it when the crew manifest was submitted. Support staff, their liaison had written, in the bored tone of someone filling out a form they considered beneath them. Euryketh watched Elara Voss sit completely still for 40 minutes while the senior delegates argued about seating arrangements. She didn't fidget. She didn't check a device. She didn't look at the ceiling the way bored beings tended to, that unconscious upward drift of the eyes when the mind has already left the room. She just watched, not the people, not the arguing. She watched the room itself, the way the ventilation current moved the hanging documentation banners, the flicker pattern of the overhead lighting grid, the micro-vibrations in the floor plating every time the ship's secondary drive cycled. Euryketh had spent 40 years reading rooms. This human, she realized with a chill that moved through all 3 of her cardiac chambers simultaneously, was reading the room better. To understand what happened next, you need to understand one thing about the Solvane. They evolved on a world with predators, not the way most species use that word, as history, as mythology, as something overcome. The Solvane evolved alongside the Vethric, apex hunters of their home planet Solvith Prime, and the Vethric never went extinct. They were still there, still active, still relevant. The Solvane had built their entire civilization around a biological inheritance that never fully switched off. The constant, cellular-level awareness of being watched by something that wanted to eat them. It made them extraordinary diplomats. It made them extraordinary strategists. It made their architecture deeply unsettling to other species because every Solvane building was designed with sight lines to every possible entrance, and they could not stop doing this even in space. It also meant that every Solvane alive carried, threaded through their neurology like copper wire through old stone walls, a system called a thresh sense, an involuntary response to perceived threat. Not fear exactly, more like a constant, humming radar, a frequency they broadcast and received without meaning to, that said, I know where the danger is. I know what is watching me. I have already calculated the distance. The thresh sense was social. It was collective. When one Solvane locked onto a threat, nearby Solvane felt it as a soft pressure behind their secondary eyes, like the feeling of a word you can't remember but know you know. 32 Solvane were present in that observation deck. Every single one of them, without knowing why, without discussing it, had angled their bodies, subtly, professionally, plausibly, deniably, away from Elara Voss. Not away from the loud human with the medals, away from the quiet one in the back row, who hadn't spoken a word in 40 minutes and was watching the ventilation currents. The summit's official purpose was infrastructure. The Solvane Collective had recently absorbed 3 smaller civilizations through what they called resonance integration, essentially peaceful absorption, though the word peaceful carried particular Solvane definition that other species sometimes found worth examining closely. One of those civilizations, the Drevithi, had left behind a system of deep space relay nodes that the Solvane needed to maintain. The nodes used Drevithi-built quantum architecture, and the Solvane, despite 11 years of trying, could not fully integrate them into their own network. They needed help. They had invited the humans because humans had, twice before, successfully interfaced with Drevithi technology in ways no other species had managed. Nobody was sure why. The humans themselves seemed unsure why. The official explanation from the Terran Science Division was compatible systems architecture, possibly coincidental. The unofficial explanation, shared in Sylvain backchannels, was more uncomfortable, that humans had an irrational, almost compulsive relationship with broken things, that they approached non-functioning systems not with methodical analysis, but with something closer to personal grievance, like the machine had wronged them specifically, like fixing it was a matter of honor. Yoriketh found this deeply strange. She also found it deeply effective, which she found even stranger. The senior human delegate, a man named Colonel Bryce Harmon, had spent the first 2 days of the summit presenting proposals, asking questions, demonstrating the warm and forceful competence that humans seem to deploy like a social weapon. He was impressive. He was thorough. He was almost certainly not going to be able to fix the relay nodes. Yoriketh had been watching the wrong human for 2 days. She realized this on the third morning, when she walked into the technical briefing room early and found Alara Voss already there alone, standing in front of the holographic schematic of Node Array 7, not touching anything, not taking notes, just standing there with her head tilted 3 degrees to the left. Yoriketh stopped in the doorway. Alara turned around. "The resonance map is wrong," Alara said, not as an accusation, almost conversationally, like she was mentioning the weather. "Whoever translated the Drevithi notation into your visual format made an assumption about directionality. The signal doesn't flow the way this diagram shows. It breathes." Yoriketh stared at her. "It breathes," she repeated. "Yeah." Alara turned back to the schematic. The Drevithi didn't think of information as traveling. They thought of it as expanding and contracting, like lungs. This diagram shows a river, but it's not a river. It's a lung. The room was very quiet. "How long have you known this?" Yoriketh asked. Alara glanced at her sideways. "Since the manifest briefing. Day 1. Why didn't you say anything?" Alara was quiet for a moment. Then, "I needed to understand why it was wrong before I said anything. Saying this is wrong, without knowing why, just creates noise." A small pause. "There's already a lot of noise." Alara Voss had been a systems interpreter for 6 years, and in those 6 years she had been underestimated approximately every working day. This was not self-pity. It was data. She had tracked it loosely, the way she tracked everything, not obsessively, but with the quiet background attention she gave anything that might become relevant later. The underestimation came in several forms. There was the active kind, from people like Colonel Harmon, who had once described her role to a foreign dignitary as, "She reads the manuals." There was the passive kind, from colleagues who simply routed around her in conversations, not hostile, just habitually unaware that she was there. And there was the institutional kind, the single gray stripe, the Deck 9 accommodations, the job title so vague it served as a social invisibility cloak. She had learned to use all of it, not as a weapon, exactly, more as a condition. Like working in low gravity. You adapted your technique. You used the environment's properties rather than fighting them. When people didn't watch you, you could watch everything. When people didn't listen to you, you could listen to everything. When people assumed your presence was incidental, you could go anywhere without anyone tracking your access or questioning your routes. She had been inside 6 restricted compartments on the Karen, unfolding that she was technically not cleared for, not to steal anything, not out of recklessness. She had a specific, quiet anxiety that she'd never fully named, a need to understand the whole system before she trusted any part of it. Walking the actual physical infrastructure of a ship or a building or an institution, tracing its load-bearing realities with her own feet, was the only way she could fully think. She had found, on the 4th level below the summit meeting rooms, a small chamber that hummed, not mechanically, not electrically. It hummed in a frequency she felt in her back teeth and her sternum before she heard it with her ears, a standing wave of something that the Sylvain instruments were clearly not measuring, because if they were measuring it, someone would have mentioned it, and nobody had mentioned it. She stood in that chamber for 11 minutes. Then she went back upstairs and sat in the back row of the morning briefing, and said nothing, because she still didn't know what it meant. After the schematic conversation, Yoriketh did something she had never done in 40 years of diplomacy. She asked a junior staff member to have lunch with her, not formally, She sent a message through the ship's internal channel that simply said, "If you're not eating with your delegation at midday, I eat on the observation tier above the engine housing. The view is poor, but the pressure is stable." Elara came. They sat across from each other with a small table between them and the low amber light of the engine housing glow coming up through the floor panels, and Yoriketh studied the human with both sets of eyes, the front-facing social ones and the side-peripheral ones that most non-Solvane didn't know she had. "I want to ask you something," Yoriketh said. "Okay. My colleagues, have you noticed how they position themselves in your presence?" Elara considered this carefully, which Yoriketh appreciated. She didn't immediately say yes or no. "I notice they don't look at me directly for long," Elara said slowly. "And there's a reorganization that happens when I enter a room. Small, subtle, like iron filings adjusting around a magnet, but nobody wants to acknowledge the magnet." Yoriketh's gill crest shifted. "You know what it means?" "I know it's involuntary, which means it's biological, which means it's old." Elara looked at her. "It means I'm triggering something they evolved to feel, not something they chose to feel." Yoriketh was quiet for what felt like a very long time. "The thresh sense," she finally said. "You register to it as a predator, not metaphorically. The actual, ancient, cellular warning system that our people carry reads you as a threat at the same tier as a Vethric." She had expected this to alarm the human. Elara looked, if anything, tired. "That's the third time," she said quietly. The third species whose threat detection system has flagged me." She said it without pride, without anger, with the flat effect of someone reporting a recurring software error they've stopped expecting to be fixed. "I don't know why. I've never been able to figure out why. It just happens. Always has." She looked out at the engine glow. "I'm not dangerous," she said. "I've never hurt anyone. I'm not planning to. She paused. "I watch things. I pay attention to things most people have decided aren't worth attention. I don't know if that's the same as being dangerous, or if it just looks the same from the outside." Yoriketh thought about this for a long time. "In our old language," she said carefully, "the word for witness and the word for hunter are the same word. We split them apart 3,000 years ago because civilization required the distinction, but the body never learned the difference." Elara turned to look at her. Something passed between them that was not quite understanding and not quite recognition, but lived in the space between both words. On the 5th day, Colonel Harmon presented the human team's official solution to the relay node problem. It was elegant. It was well-reasoned. It had 12 supporting documents and a 90-minute presentation with clean visual aids. And it was also, Elara knew from the second slide, completely wrong. Not maliciously wrong. Harmon was brilliant in his domain, but his domain was negotiation, resource allocation, human Solvane diplomatic architecture, the soft infrastructure of agreement. He had taken the technical team's best analysis, which was itself working from a mistranslated schematic, and built a beautiful solution on top of a false foundation. The Solvane delegation received it with a particular quality of Solvane silence that Elara had learned to read over 5 days, the silence that meant we are being polite while we calculate how to say no. During the break, Elara found Yoriketh at the hydration station. "It won't work," Elara said. "No," Yoriketh agreed. "If Harmon finds out he's wrong at this stage, in this room, in front of this delegation..." Elara stopped. "The summit fractures," Yoriketh finished. "He has built his authority here on the structural certainty of that proposal. If the foundation breaks, he will not separate his personal credibility from the technical failure. Humans do not do that easily." Elara looked at her. "You've studied us." "Extensively." "Then you know what I'm about to suggest." Yoriketh's gill crest rose slowly. "You want to correct the solution without correcting the proposal. I want to make a solution become the right solution by changing what we're applying it to. The proposal is structurally sound. It's just solving for the wrong variable. If we reframe the node problem using the breathing lung model instead of the river model, his approach actually works. Almost perfectly. You would let him take credit. He deserves credit. He built something real. He just built it in the wrong place. I want to move the foundation under it." She paused. And I need your help. I need a Solvane technical voice to introduce the reframing. If I do it, it reads as junior staff undermining the lead delegate. Euryketh studied her with all four eyes. You are remarkably willing to be invisible, she said. I'm remarkably good at being invisible, Ilara said. Those aren't the same thing. Part 7. The Humming Chamber and What It Actually Was. That evening, Ilara took Euryketh to the Humming Chamber. It took some navigation. Euryketh had been on this ship for 11 years and had never been in this section, which Ilara found interesting in a way she didn't comment on. The chamber was small and featureless, brushed gray walls, no equipment, no markings except a faint pattern near the floor that might have been decorative or might have been something else. They stood in it together and felt it, the frequency, the teeth and sternum hum. Euryketh went very still. What is this room? Ilara asked. The Solvane ambassador was quiet for a long time. The hum moved through the room's air like something alive. When we integrated the Drevithi, Euryketh said slowly, there were things we did not fully understand, things we cataloged as architectural artifacts and planned to study later. She paused. We have not studied them. How many rooms like this are there? On this vessel alone? 14. Ilara crouched down and looked at the pattern near the floor. Up close, it wasn't decorative. It was notation. Drevithi notation. The same system she'd spent 5 days learning to read from the relay schematics. She translated it quietly, moving her lips slightly, the way she did when she was reading something hard. Then she sat back on her heels. Euryketh, she said, these chambers aren't artifacts. What are they? They're the actual relay system. She looked up. The nodes in space, the ones you've been trying to fix, they're not the primary architecture. They're the peripheral architecture. The breathing lung system, the core of it, it's housed in physical chambers, built into ships, built into structures. The Drevithi didn't build a wireless network. They built a distributed somatic network. The information doesn't travel through space. It resonates through matter. The hum continued. Euryketh looked at the walls of the chamber, as if seeing them for the first time. We integrated 3 Drevithi ships into our fleet, she said quietly. 14 chambers each. And every ship that the Drevithi ever built, Ilara said, is still broadcasting, still breathing, still part of the network. She paused. The relay nodes in space aren't broken. They've never been the main system. You've been treating the fingernails and ignoring the heartbeat. She told Euryketh everything that night, not in a dramatic way. They were sitting on the floor of the humming chamber because it seemed like the right place, and the hum had settled into something that felt less like a warning and more like a presence. And Ilara talked in quiet, careful way she talked when she was saying something she had never said out loud. She said, when she was 8 years old, she had taken apart every electronic device in her family's apartment because she needed to understand how they connected to each other, not how each one worked individually, but the whole system, the total picture, and she had not been able to reassemble them all, which had created significant family tension that she still thought about. She said that compulsion had never left, that she walked into every room, every building, every relationship, every institution, and immediately, involuntarily, began mapping exits and entrances, load-bearing structures, points of failure, the gap between what a system claimed to do and what it actually did. She couldn't turn it off. She had stopped trying. She said she was good at her work, and she knew she was good at her work, and that knowing had never once made her feel safe, because the thing she was afraid of was not failure. The thing she was afraid of was being in a system she didn't fully understand when it broke. She had that nightmare, regularly, standing in the middle of something vast and failing, and not having mapped it well enough to know how to stop it. That is why the thresh sense reads you as a predator, Euryketh said softly, not because you hunt, because you prepare. The Vethric. The creatures our people evolved fearing. They do not attack from aggression. They attack from complete readiness. They spend weeks mapping territory before they act. She paused. You map everything. Constantly. Your whole body is in a permanent state of about to understand. To an ancient biological alarm system, that is the most dangerous thing alive. Ilara stared at the floor. I've always felt like it was a problem, she said. The way I am. Systems theory as a concept. Uraketh said, redundancy. The value of a backup that no one is using, that everyone has forgotten is there, that holds everything together precisely because it operates outside the main circuit. She looked at Alara. You are the room everyone forgets to check. You are the circuit that is never stressed, never depleted, never used for the ordinary load. So when the main system fails, you're the only one with capacity left. Alara was quiet for a long time. The chamber hummed. We should tell Colonel Harmon. Alara said finally, about the chambers, about all of it. He deserves to know what's actually here. It will change the summit entirely. I know. He will likely take the discovery as his own. Probably. And you will let him. Alara thought about it honestly. I'll let the summit succeed, she said carefully. That's different. What I care about is the system working, not who gets credit for it. Uraketh was quiet. Then, that is either very healthy or very sad. I cannot tell which. Neither can I, Alara said. I've been working on it. The summit concluded on the 9th day with a joint framework that nobody had predicted at the start. The Relay Node project was suspended. In its place, a comprehensive survey of every Drevity-built structure in the Solvane Collective, mapping the somatic resonance network that had been operating unrecognized for 11 years. A network that connected not just ships and stations, but, and this was the part that made the Solvane technical team go very quiet when they fully understood it, the biological tissue of every Drevity individual who had been integrated into the collective, whose resonance signatures were still present, still breathing, still in the network. The Drevity were not gone. They had been absorbed. They had been cataloged. They had been considered concluded. They were still talking. Colonel Harmon stood at the head of the table and presented this discovery with the confidence of a man who had always known exactly what he was doing, and Uraketh caught Alara's eye from across the room and did not smile, because Solvane faces did not make that expression, but her gill crest moved in a way that Alara had learned over 9 days to read. The gray-striped woman in the back row looked at her hands. She was already thinking about the next system, not anxiously, not compulsively, with a particular quality of attention that she had stopped apologizing for, the total, patient, thorough witnessing that 3 species worth of predator detection had recognized and named before she had named it herself. She thought about what Uraketh had said, the circuit that operates outside the main load, the backup no one remembers until the primary fails. She thought, maybe that's enough. Maybe that's exactly enough. The summit room was loud with history being made. Alara Voss sat in the back row and watched the ventilation banners move in the air current and listened to the way the floor plating vibrated when the secondary drive cycled. She was mapping. She was always mapping. And somewhere in the walls of the Karen unfolding, 14 chambers breathed in frequencies older than any language in the room. Patient, continuous, present, waiting to be understood by someone who had never once confused being quiet with being absent.